for Fall Guys actually decided to kind of pivot this in a different direction and encourage teams that are doing these designs to kind of to bid for the opportunity to have their design featured in the game. And in exchange, whatever cost they meet for that is going to be featured in the is going to be used for a charity specifically designed to help gamers with physical disabilities get tools to help them better play games, so to speak.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm glad that they're doing that too, because like like you said, if you think about it, it presented a perfect opportunity to just come out and do that, right?
Well, right, exactly. I mean, you're looking at not only the popularity of the game, but also like the sort of notoriety of all the brands involved in this.
Right.
And they took something that very easily could have been, let me get retweeted by every fast food chain in the US. And instead, they pivoted to, let's find a way to use this to better the community and then also still maintain that level of engagement, still have that fan interaction piece where everybody's kind of involved on Twitter. And then ultimately creating one of those everybody wins situations.
Exactly. So a couple other ideas I have too, in terms of how you can get, increase your financial and integrity, sustainability. Would we mentioned courses before or online programs. One example of this I can think of right off the bat is the developer of The First Tree. I forget his last name, David, which was the program he created is called Game Dev Unlocked. So it's another way that he's showing the whole process of how to make a game from scratch, market it, get it out there, and everything. It's really good that he's doing that, and you can see like I'm actually part of the community or part of the program itself because I was naturally curious as well. And even some of the I would call them, I guess, promotional videos, but they're just so motivating, so inspiring that he uses. So like you know that everything that this guy is doing is really sincere and honest in his intent. And he's doing two things. He definitely is increasing his integrity, and he's branding. His integrity as a whole, but also on the other side, he's selling these courses. So from a financial standpoint, he's creating other forms, other channels of income, and also making himself more sustainable, because I bet he has a lot more planned in the future in terms of other things that he wants to do to help serve the community. On the same or similar front, you could write a book, right? And one person who has done that recently, that just came out with this, I believe a few weeks ago, was I might be butchering his name, but Lad Marhulitz, and he's the dev of Dark. I'm sure everybody or most of you can recall that game, and it's DARQ. And he wrote the book Game Dev 10 Steps for Making Your First Game Successful. So again, that's another way that he's looking out to, really provide value to the communities, build up that integrity, that authority side of him, but also it's another means, another channel that he can be financial successfully and sustainable. And the thing is too, like, not any one of these, just focusing on them is going to be like your bread and butter, right? And why would it be, especially if the focus is making games? But it's always good. Like, you don't just want to put all your eggs in one basket and stuff. And though it doesn't necessarily relate from a community standpoint, but it is a direction I see a lot of people going in, or a lot of teams they're providing value in different ways, where they're now turning to becoming a developer and a publisher, because they have all this experience and everything, and now they're thinking, let's shift gears a little bit. We can still make our own titles, but now we can help others that need that reach, that understanding, that information to having their dreams realized, and then they're also benefiting from it in terms of getting some of the sales by being a publisher and still being a studio and everything like that. So there's a lot of different directions you can go into on those fronts. All right, so that gives us an idea of how to be sustainable in two different parts, financially and from an integrity standpoint, with your brand. But in addition to that, what would you say are some just very basic opportunities that you think, Mustapha, can be created from providing more value to communities?
Right. Yeah. Well, thematically speaking, we've said it probably a million times. Authenticity is palpable. People are always going to know when you're being real and honest about things. So if your contributions to your community and the way that you're engaged is coming from an authentic, a genuine place, people are typically responsive to that. They like brands that share their values, particularly brands that act on the values that they claim. We talked about this during one of our episodes in June, the one that Victoria Tran from Kit Fox was on.
Yep.
Ben and Jerry's, for instance, they're such a good example because, obviously the cost of their ice cream is higher than a lot of other brands of ice cream. And while they tend to have a lot of very creative flavors, I think a lot of the reason why people gravitate toward them is because they've amassed such a positive reputation for always kind of maintaining an emphasis on social change that's been in their company since it started. So different industry entirely, but the principle still applies. If you are consistent in your execution of your values and beliefs, people are very responsive to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and the thing is too, is as you said, people generally tend to gravitate to brands or people too, that share their values. Right. But what's really cool about that doesn't necessarily mean it's only going to be relating to your immediate community. And let's say, immediate in this example, for some context, I'd say relating to the gaming industry. Because let's say if, just a simple example is you make a game or it's an extra game in addition to, or it might be relating to, another title that you have out already, for example, and you're saying all proceeds are going to be, donated to this charity, right? That could draw the attention. People could draw the attention of people that aren't in your typical audience, or it could draw the attention of media that isn't in your typical ideal space to target media. But then they could come out and be like, wow, we really like this. Not only you're sharing your values, or these are some our values that our audience has, and we want to share your story now with our audience. And whether that audience relates to yours or not, it's still getting you out there. It's still building up your integrity and everything else that we've talked about, and expanding your reach. And there's just so many more opportunities then that could come out of that thing, out of that, the example I use, that generous act of donating to charity. But it's just one way to look at this, right? Just because at the core of it, people, regardless of if they're in your communities, outside of your communities, or outside of your even intended audience, they're naturally going to come to you. And then it just, who knows what opportunities can open up there, and how you can further gain additional reach, because I think it could be a chain reaction, right? Just more and more people aligning with you, and then wanting to share your story, depending on what that is. And it might not be always the case, but I think it's more likely to happen than not, when you start looking out, thinking outside of the box, and how you can really ultimately serve more than just your immediate communities. All right. Man, we covered a lot with all this. And it did go outside of our realm a little bit in terms of specifically marketing and everything. But again, I mean, we outlined what those ways of how it can really be beneficial from a fulfillment standpoint, and even from an integrity and financial standpoint too. So with all that in mind, let's kind of boil some of this down, and what are some key takeaways, or at least questions that if people are really considering doing this, whether it's now or in the future, what things should they be asking themselves when they want to get to that point and when they're ready to really help serve their communities and beyond.
Right. Well, I mean, first and foremost, identify your values. You know, what is important to you? What is in alignment with what you want your brand to be and what your image to be? And ideally, it should be something that aligns with your personal values as well. You know, so make sure whatever you kind of want to see is represented in your brand, so long as you have the authority to do that. Otherwise, I think you probably want something that's a little bit more communal as far as like your team's understanding of what your company's values represent.
Yeah, and that's why I think it was 128 episode. That's one of the things we talked about too, I think, is like having something like a mission script, right? Where in part of that you can really outline, you know, what your team's values are and everything. And that's one of the reasons why that comes into play too. There's a lot of other things too that are overlapping and over encompassing, but that's another way. So if you do that exercise that we talk about briefly, that's another good way of how you can really answer that question. I would say another one too would be, you know, how can what you're thinking about benefit your brand and your community? Again, because though you, to some point, as we discussed, you do want to be a little bit self-serving because there's always a bottom line to something. You got to, you know, put food on the table, so to speak, type of thing. Or just keep hitting milestones so you can keep hitting your goals and everything else and grow. But you want to be mindful of both things, because if one is, you can't just focus solely on one or the other. They have to go hand in hand, because as we discussed, if you're focusing just on you, well, it's going to come off as disingenuous. If you're focusing on helping others and really serving others entirely, well, then it's going to eat away, and you're not going to be able to be sustainable to support yourself, and then you can't continue doing these helpful things that you want to do. So I would say that's another one. What's another one you would say, Mustafa?
So you know, in the talks of like identifying values, you know, there's also kind of the thematic consistency piece. You know, making sure that your brand identity is represented in everything that you're doing. And so from that angle, kind of being very intentional about how you approach how you approach your sort of community outreach and engagement, picking and choosing things that are consistent enough where it's not like, you know, the example I think that I would use is like, if you're known for, and I guess this does kind of leak into our fourth one too, which is like keeping the format conducive to you and your audience.
Yep.
When it comes to like education, for instance, if people are going to be responsive to seeing your name because you're known for making the best party games in the world, maybe don't have a panel or a talk about how to build really in-depth strategy games. I mean, you can if you want to, but reality is people are probably going to be a little bit confused about why that's coming from you. And people who would be interested in hearing talks from you probably would be for a reason that's probably related to what you are most known for.
Yeah, and I mean, going back to what you said, the thematic consistency is important, because sometimes you might come up with something that you kind of really want to do, but it might not necessarily be the right move to. And you'll have to play around with that. And a good way to find out if you're, let's say you really want to do something, but you might get tunnel vision because you're really excited about it. You know, ask others, ask your team members, ask other people to say, hey, do you think this makes sense? Does this align? Does this do anything else? And then you can really get to the bottom of it. And then for the format, you know, again, making sure that it's conducive to you and your audience, because if let's say you want to try to do something that, like, let's say you want to make a course, but you know nothing about making a course, right? You could always, there's ways to learn and everything else like that. But maybe it might be something else where, and then if you have the time and the resources, especially, that you can have someone else kind of like tackle that project So that way you don't have to necessarily focus on it, but you're kind of there to kind of like lead and guide in terms of ultimately what you're looking to do and having someone else do it. Or you can just take the reins, or your team can take the reins and make that thing happen too. And then